This is not about scientific community itself. Alrighty, this crossed my radar earlier today. Um, and it crossed my radar for a reason here because it comes from 538, and those of you who've been on this channel long enough know that the topic, trust in science, trust in expertise, and what have you, has been something that's I've talked about on this channel more than a few times. Had panel discussions on it, had video conversations on it, and in fact, matter, the upcoming podcast that myself and another esteemed colleague are going to be hosting together actually focuses on an article that talks about trust in science. So, from a very different perspective, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it is coming very, very soon. Um, Trust in science has become increasingly partisan. This comes from 538. And this particular graphic is in the article in question. The article itself is very long, but I encourage you to read it, and I will leave it in the description for you, as always. But here is the article itself in question. Why being anti-science is part of many rural Americans' identity. This actually is from April 25th, 2022, so I don't know why 538 was tweeting about it now. Admittedly, they could have had some more tweets about it, and I just didn't see them until now. Distinctly possible. But I got a problem with this because of the framing here, and it speaks to a distinct big problem with the nonsense, a distinct big problem with how science is talked about. Because what they're actually looking at in this data most of the time is not about trust in science as much as it is trust in scientists, which is two very different questions, actually. You can think the scientific method is a great thing, and you can also not trust someone to be implementing it correctly. You can also not trust someone to be acting in your best interest, though, as it happens to be a scientist, using their knowledge and expertise for in the best interests of the public. Those two things, you can also think the scientific method is crap, and yet think somebody else is probably still good at it. Though I doubt that's as possible as you think, because you'd have to change what is the scientific method involved in that. So that's a whole other can of worms. But you can think the scientific method is great, think it's a good process to go by to get at the truth, or for any number of different things, solving societal problems and what have you. And you can also think that scientists are not doing it well, or out for their own gain, or what have you, any number of things that would signal a lack of trust. The other thing that bothers me in all of this is, of course, we have the continued dehumanization of people by grouping people off into identities based on different things that don't necessarily really make up your identity, per se, because you only have one identity. I'm sorry, you don't have multiple identities. That is a bullcrap thing to me. That is very much bullcrap for what I think about this. And yet that's what we're pushing on people. So I don't want to read through this whole thing. Like I said, this article is very, very long, and I'm going to try and keep this video relatively short. But there are a few things I wanted to point out. And it starts here. People in rural areas hold old, well-known anxieties about scientists, particularly when the scientists come from the government. Kristen Luns Trujillo, a postdoctoral researcher with the COVID States Project, said this anxiety stemmed from an attitude that pits rural hands-on knowledge against the knowledge obtained from institutions like universities or government bureaucracies, the kind of anti-establishment view that extends to scientists. Look, I'm not going to say that doesn't exist. That there is that kind of mentality of being anti-establishment. But what I see in all of these kinds of things is, why don't people trust the scientists in here? Why? And there is never a tendency to look inward at that. There is never a tendency to look inward at that particular thing, at yourselves, the experts, to ask, okay, what did we do that people don't trust us? Because they're not wrong, actually. I caught a Pew study recently that the trust in scientists, and particularly medical scientists, has gone down a lot in the last couple of years, quite significantly. And I'll dig up that Pew poll and include it in the description for you as well. But this is just the thing that bothers me the most is that there is never a moment where so many do not stop and think about, did we really consider what we might have done as a community of scientists to forego the trust of those we want to trust us. Let's put it that way. Also, the thing is, I have a problem with science versus scientism, as we've talked about many times on this channel. Scientism is the irrational belief that science can solve all ills, essentially. It's a great short version of way of thinking that. Scientism, in a sense, basically says that science can answer every question, including all the moral ones. And that's not true. Science can't do that because science is a process by which one gets the truth. It doesn't provide anyone with a moral compass, and so it can't really do that. Can't really answer the moral questions. Yeah, and so I gotta point this out that, yeah, there is a lot of animosity that can be there. It's not always there. And as they pointed out in this article, you can get around a lot of that or deal with a lot of those problems by actually having sit downs and time to actually talk with people about these things. Talk with people at discussions. And I think in all the things that they forget with all this and all the rush to dehumanize people and group people into this identity or that identity, or in this case, as this article goes, the rural identity, you do forget that these people are human. Everybody's human in this. Separating people off into the expert that comes from the government, the person from the rural community, for example. When you start separating off and say that's your identity like that, it's dehumanizing, and it makes it really easy to think of someone as the other. And we've been doing that for a long time. Been doing that for a very long time. No thanks to critical theory related stuff. That's probably a very good reason why there's a lot of distrust nowadays. Is the critical theory related stuff in the 80s that got started, 70s and 80s, where you did start thinking of people in terms of identities and which group do they belong to. That's really, really easy to start dehumanizing people. And I don't think they ever thought about that. And I don't think the scientists in question that are concerned now about the lack of trust ever thought about it seriously. And I also want to make a point here because, let's see, now this attitude has become more entwined with partisanship and partisan politics. In 2021 paper published in the American Political Science Review, political scientists David Barker, Ryan DeTamble, and Morgan Marietta looked at Republicans' growing distrust of scientists and other experts. Their research shows that partly due to the education divide, i.e. college graduates prefer the Democratic Party, white people without a college degree prefer the Republican Party, the divide between those who are pro-intellectualism and those who are anti-intellectualism is more entrenched in party politics. I disagree that this is about intellectualism. I very much disagree with that. And, the interesting thing here is, how do they refer to intellectualism with this? They refer to it, I believe this is the article. Yes, this is the article in question that they're referring to in the thing here. I'm going to have to zoom out a little bit, just to make it a little easier to read. Intellectualism, anti-intellectualism, and epistemic hubris in Red and Blue America. Here's the thing about it. So this is the abstract. I don't have the article itself here in front of me, and I may try to get hold of it for an article review session sometime in the near future. Epistemic hubris, the expression of unwarranted factual certitude, is a conspicuous yet understudied democratic hazard. Here, in 2 nationally representative studies, we examine its features and analyze its variants. We hypothesize and find that epistemic hubris is A, prevalent, B, bipartisan, and C, associated with both intellectualism, an identity marked by rumination habits and learning for its own sake, and anti-intellectualism, negative effect toward intellectuals and the intellectual establishment. Moreover, these correlates, that grammar doesn't sound right, of epistemic hubris are distinctly partisan. Intellectuals are disproportionately democratic, while Democrats, actually, whereas anti-intellectuals are disproportionately Republican. By implication, we suggest that both intellectualism in Blue America and anti-intellectualism of Red America contribute to the intemperance and intransigence that characterize civil society in the United States. Okay. Why do I have a problem with this phrasing? Because if we want to go back to root origins, then we got to ask the question of what do you mean by intellectualism and what do you mean by intellect to begin with? Because the way it is used in this context and in this previous 538 article is not at all the in the way that the etymology would suggest for the word. Well, let's go to that real quick. Oh, shoot. I gotta shrink it a little bit more again. What the heck? Hang on. We'll figure this out. Live fixing. There we go. That's the one for intellect. This is the one I want first. So, intellectualism. This comes from Etymology Online. 1818 in philosophy. Belief in the supremacy of the intellect. Probably based on the German intellectualismus. I cannot pronounce it. Apologies. And from the Latin intellectualis, see intellectualism, meaning devotion to intellectuality, also from 1818. Entries linking to intellectualism, intellectual. Late 14th century, grasped by the understanding rather than by the senses, from the Old French intellectuale, and directly from Latin intellectualis, relating to the understanding, and intellectus, discernment, understanding, noun use of past participle of intelligere, to understand, discern. Sense of characterized by high degree of intellect is from 1819, meaning appealing to or engaging the mental powers is from 1834. Intellectual property, products of the intellect, is attested from 1845. Adjective formations of the sense, in the sense, quote, of or pertaining to the intellect, include the intellective, intellectile. So, the ism on the end is word-forming element in nouns, and making it a practice, a system, or a doctrine. So, in other words, you have a practice of discernment, or a practice of understanding. Think about it from the standpoint, if it's intellectualism, is a practice of discernment, or a doctrine of discernment, or understanding, as taken from the etymology of the two pieces here. That is not what we mean by intellectualism in these articles. And just for also to add to it, the word intellect itself. Some of the cognitive abilities, except sense and imagination, the capacity for reasoning truth, late 14th century, from the Old French intellectual capacity, and directly from the intellectus, Latin intellectus, discernment, a perception, understanding. Noun use, past participle of intelligere, to understand, discern. The Latin word was used to translate the Greek nous, mind, thought, intellect, in Aristotle. So again, when we're talking about intellectualism in terms of what it actually is in the etymology, we're talking about the practice of understanding, the practice of discernment, the practice of using your mind and the understanding, and in the thing here, capacity for reasoning truth. Nothing about that says you have to have an advanced degree. Nothing about that says you have to have an advanced degree at all, be it from a government, be from anywhere. You can practice intellectualism, if you will. Well, that's a little redundant, the phrasing here, but you can practice discernment and understanding and the pursuit of the truth without having a degree, without being an expert from some field and having millions of degrees and what have you. your just goal of having to pursue the truth. Nothing about what I said in the etymology here has to do with having a huge amount of degrees or coming from the expert or going to university for however many years or working in a university for however many years. That's not intellectualism. What they refer to in these articles, like this one, as intellectualism here is really just to say, do you or do you not trust experts from universities? And that is what the actual thing here is, not the intellectualism in terms of the practice of understanding and the practice of discernment in the mind. You can have that without being an expert in some field, without having gone to a university, without having been in a government agency or a big business or anything like that. It's just the practice of discernment and understanding and reasoning. You do not need a degree to do that, is what intellectualism really is. But what this is here, and they kind of talk about it with this intellectual as an intellectual establishment and what have you, identity marked by rumination habits, learning for its own sake. It's not an identity, it's a practice. Thank you very much. Here. And, this is all about the people with advanced degrees here. The people who come from universities, the people from governments and what have you. That's not being anti-intellectual. Or anti-intellectualism. In fact, a lot of these people that are being smeared in this particular article from 538 may very well be intellectual and very book-read people. Very smart people from things they've learned by experience. Very much thinking about the world around them. They just don't have the degrees and don't necessarily trust somebody to come in with the degrees to tell them how to do things when they know what they've been doing themselves in their own lives, in their own areas for a very, very long time. And some of this is generational knowledge too. So, no, I'm sorry. This is not intellectualism that they're talking about here. This is not anti-intellectualism they're talking about here. They are talking about, when they use it in this phrasing like this, it is not about the intellectuals, in the practice of intellectualism, the practice of discernment, the practice of understanding, the practice of reasoning to get at the truth. You don't need degrees to do any of that. In fact, I know very many people who are very good at reasoning who don't have the advanced degrees that I do. They're great people. They know their stuff very, very well. Very smart, highly intellectual people. What they're talking about when they say pro-intellectualism and anti-intellectualism here is whether or not you trust somebody like me who has advanced degrees telling you about all this stuff when they come to you and saying you should do X, X, and X. And unfortunately, they're slamming everybody who lives in a rural, with this article, slamming everybody who lives in a rural environment as being both, for one thing, always Republican, which is definitely not always true. Well, I can't say they said always Republican, but they're slamming people as just being Republicans. And so one of the other things that's about pretty poor framing in this article is that actually they do get into this kind of thing of saying, oh, yeah, the Republicans are attracting all the people that have distrusted scientists and other experts. This is, again, how you know this is not about intellectualism itself, the practice of reason and finding the truth. No. This is about the distrusting people who come in with advanced degrees and try to tell you how to do things. That's pretty much the actual view that's there. The last thing I really want to hit on this article, because again, this is a long article, and there's a lot of things I could talk about, but I wanted to leave it brief. You probably seen this graphic circulating if you saw the tweet from 538, and a couple of other folks have been talking about it. But I wanted to make a point, because for one thing, there's a few things here on the graphics, and I already kind of hit at this. Trust in science has become increasingly partisan. Okay. Share of Americans who said they had a great deal of confidence in the scientific community by party affiliation 1973 to 2021. Do you see the difference there? Trust in science. Confidence in the scientific community. Those are two very different things. We already talked about this once at the start. Trust in science versus trust in scientists are two different things. And what you're showing is not at all about trust in science. It's about trust in scientists, scientific community. Here as being represented. Which, yeah, data-wise, I'm not gonna lie. I know where they got this data from, the General Social Survey. Which is gonna make the funny thing happen make for some funny things, because this graphic is wrong. This graphic is wrong in what it shows you. In their framing of this graphic, it is absolutely wrong. Because I know the question that was asked over time here that gives the answer to this that they used in here to get this data. I know it. I can show you, and I will here shortly. But this is not the question that was asked. They did not, in the General Social Survey, the question that has this data was not about the confidence in the scientific community. Actually, let me show you. This is the General Social Survey. Again, this will be linked in the description for you. Confidence in scientific community. Yes, that's the short name. But here is the actual question in the survey. And this is important, right? I am going to name some institutions in this country. As far as the people running these institutions are concerned, would you say you have a great deal of confidence, only some confidence, or hardly any confidence at all in them? And this was a multi-thing question, so there was like a table and what have you. And this is the scientific community. That's not confidence in the scientific community, as far as the people running these institutions are concerned. This is about the leaders of the scientific community, the way this question is phrased. That is definitely a way I would interpret it in reading it. Not the scientific community as a whole, not scientists as a whole. And they framed it completely wrong in 538 to point out that. They framed it completely wrong in 538 to leave that out. This is not about trust in the scientific community as a whole. It's about trust in the people running the institutions. As far as the people running these institutions are concerned, would you say you have a great deal of confidence, only some confidence, or hardly any confidence at all in them? I did not formulate the question myself. This, again, has been around. This General Social Survey, as you can see with the timeline on the bottom there, has been around since 1972. Just celebrated 50 years. But it's... that question, as I would interpret it, I would be saying that I only have some trust right now, and I am a scientist for a living. I'm a climate scientist for a living. And I don't necessarily have full, complete trust. I'm some confidence, not great deal of confidence necessarily in the leadership of the institutions. So that's the actual answer to that's the actual question that forms the data here. And in case you might be second guessing, the nice thing about the GSS is you can go plot it yourself. You can go plot the data with key trends for any question yourself. So let's go over there. Trends. Okay. So let me break this down here by political affiliation. My, does that look familiar? Now, admittedly, in the 538 graphic, they cut it off at 30 just to make it easy to plot in there, but it is the exact same data. Here. 65, 44, 32. This is a great deal. So, like I said, same data, the same question here, the General Social Survey. Let me show you something else that's interesting, though. Only some. Let's flip it. Okay. You notice something interesting here? Like, Democrats plummet in even having only some confidence. And then odds are that probably went up to the great deal confidence, because, of course, this is COVID times that we're talking about down here. And, well, let me see, that's 2018, so 2021. Yeah, so they started plummeting a little down. But the some confidence bracket and amongst the Republicans has actually been steadily increasing. Whereas this has kind of been flatline here, maybe for the Democrat one, and the Independents one has been increasing too, probably more recently flatlining. If anything, it's really small. But yeah, Republicans, look at that. Some confidence in the leaders of the scientific community, rather, in the leaders of the institutions, is going up a little bit. The other one here is hardly any, which has been flatlined. And yeah, this reflects, this is the kind of polar opposite, but the numbers here are extremely tiny. That's the other thing they don't tell you. It's percentages here, so the actual percentage of people who think this way is because of all these lines. The blue lines all have to sum to 100%. Let's put it that way if you break it down. And we don't knows. They don't know how much they trust things, and that kind of don't know has gone down since 1972. Here in 1973 actually is when they started with this one. But this is something you can get into yourself. And I mean, we can get into it even more. Like with age group. With age group. 18 to 34s and 65 pluses. What else do we have in here? Highest degree. College Plus. See, College Plus has always been higher. But again, we're not talking about science. We're not talking even about trust in the scientific community. What was the question? Trust in the people that lead those institutions is what the actual phrasing of the question was, which is very different than saying the scientific community as a whole. Now, one thing I will give credit for is other people may have had a different interpretation than I did. And that's okay. That's okay, because you know you're going to have that. People will have different interpretations of questions, and that's why doing surveys is so damn difficult. And I do have a lot of respect for people who do conduct surveys. That it can be very, very difficult to actually get a meaningful result, even if it's not a meaningful result, regardless of what it is, just because of the questions that are there and how they can get interpreted or misinterpreted. And that is always a difficult thing to figure out how people are going to interpret it. But again, I say to you, this is not about the scientific community itself, I don't think, as much as it's about the people running the scientific community, whomever they are. At least in the way that question is phrased. That's the way I would interpret it. I would love to hear other people's interpretations. To me, therefore, this graphic is seriously disingenuous because it is referring to confidence in the scientific community as a whole by party affiliation, and specifically the Great Deal section. But yeah, that's not what that question actually says. And so I don't necessarily agree with the results here that 538 has, and I don't think it's necessarily a good idea to frame a whole group of people as anti-science when what you're actually talking about is whether or not they're willing to trust experts and scientists. Science is not about the people, it is a process by which you get at the truth. Let me know what you think. That's it for now. Until next time. Oh, wait, of course, don't forget, hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that good jazz, and until next time, I'm Adrian, and I hope you stay curious, my friends.